在2012年，美国女作家 Hannah Rosin 出版了一本书《The End of Man》，男人的终结。在书中，她描述当代的女人，无论在教育和职场上等各个领域，都已经超越了男人。父权时代即将结束，而女人在这场性别战争中已经得到了完全的胜利。
And I'd walk him through it, and I was basically trying to fix his life, is what happened.
11年过后的2023年，这件事情的差距并没有缩小。当代男人无论在教育上、职场上、两性动态上，都面对前所未有的困境。为什么当代的男人会陷入这种困境？当然，这有各种原因和解释。有人说是因为经济结构的改变，有人说是因为社群媒体的问世，也有人说是因为女权的兴起以及60年代避孕技术的发明。然而，在所有的原因里面，有个原因非常具有争议性，也是整个性别战争的核心战场，就是所谓的男子气概 （masculinity）。
We have a crisis among young men.
Masculinity is disappearing in America.
我们可以观察到一件事情：过去世代男人所拥有的男子气概，在当代男人身上已经逐渐的消失。如果你把2战时代的男人，所谓的最伟大的时代、沉默时代、战后婴儿潮时代的男人，拿来跟现在 Z 时代的男人做比较的话，我们可以发现有很大的世代差异。所以，到底什么是男子气概？是那个充满肌肉的大力士，还是那个冲进火场救火的消防员？是那个照顾家庭与小孩的父亲，还是那个可以展露自己脆弱与眼泪的男人？这看似很简单就能解释的名词，然而在当代并不是如此。在西方针对男子气概的论战非常两极化，有人认为男子气概就是问题的元凶，不只是害惨了女人，也是害惨了男人的父权压迫。也有人认为当代的男人太过于软弱与情绪化，男子气概不但不是问题，让大家重新正视男子气概的重要性才是解药。也因为这种非常激烈与两极化的价值观，让性别战争的战火达到前所未有的激烈。
That masculinity in not only a good way, but a necessary and productive and useful way.
I think young men should be more aggressive.
In fact, men would be happy, I think, to have the finger pointed at them and say, you guys can do better.
Some people believe that men need to cry and lay on the ground and be feminine like women.
I like that.
As a mother of a teenage boy, I don't like that.
I do.
Thing I've ever heard.
If they feel so scared of like coming up as gay or anything like that, and they're like, no, bro. Like, to me, it just looks like insecurity. A guy that's like, yeah, I like to suck dick sometimes. There's a lot more confidence because that's a lot to fucking say.
Here's one corporate media outlet that is willing to acknowledge some of the struggles men face, but the prescription they offer is downright terrible.
I'll go to the jungle, I'll burn it all.
虽然针对男子气概的争论是个大乱战，各方派别有各种不同的说法，但是我们可以用个简化的方式来区分出意见最不同的2个派别：左派以及右派。所以什么是左派与右派？这个名词最早来自于1789年的法国大革命。当时的国民议会支持旧制度的人站在议长的右侧，支持革命的人站在左侧，所以有这样的名词产生。而到了现代，左右派已经被广泛用于分类政治立场、意识形态和政党的系统。左派通常被认为是自由进步主义，而右派则通常被认为是传统保守主义。用一个比较简化的方式来分类，如果你是比较偏向平等开放、全球化、保护弱势，那么你会比较偏向左派的光谱；如果你是偏向秩序、能力阶级、个人主义、市场自由机制，那么你会比较偏向右派的光谱。然而，这跟男子气概的争论有什么关系呢？原因是因为在性别战争里，左右派针对男子气概的看法经常是对立与冲突的。而就在你以为左右派的争论已经够激烈时，这个冲突却在一个新的名词出现之后，性别战争的战火来到了一个新的境界。
Toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity.
什么是有毒的男子气概？这个名词是怎么来的？其实这个名词是来自于90年代初期的学术界，当时的心理学家在研究监狱里的重刑犯，他们观察到这些重刑犯经常会起冲突，攻击彼此，甚至到会谋杀对方致死的情形。当时的心理学家针对这些重刑犯的行为与现象，称作有毒的男子气概。 然而，这个名词当时只是在学术界里使用而已，而且使用的频率也不高。在2016年的时候，这个名词忽然爆火到主流媒体网络上，开始被大量使用到各种领域上面，从经济衰退、战争、全球暖化，有人不戴口罩，到你看某个男人不爽，都可以看到有人套用这个名词。
Guys can do whatever they want.
That's true.
And they are not scrutinized by their mothers, grandmothers, nobody. It goes back to fucking decades and centuries of just breeding masculinity and in some cases, a lot of cases, toxic masculinity.
Toxic masculinity exhibits traits that are characteristic to men, such as 1. Aggression, 2. Being stoic, 3. Physical and mental toughness, 4. Emotional insensitivity, 5. Self-sufficiency, 6. Discrimination against everything not heterosexual.
在2018年与2019年，美国心理学会也提出了对男子气概的批评。引述：传统的男子气概以坚韧、竞争、支配、侵略性为特征，而它整体上其实是有害的。这时候，左派批评男子气概的炮火就像得到神助攻一般，不只是批评男子气概而已，而是指控男子气概与男人的本质就是个问题。而无论当代男人到底遇到什么样的困境，根本就是小题大做。男人应该把自己的问题给处理好，才不会带给这个社会问题。而这样的一个社会氛围，也悄悄地将性别战争带到了一个新的局面。
If any other group has a problem, we say, what can we do to change the world to fix it? But if men have a problem, we say, why aren't men fixing themselves? 当社会的氛围倾向不再聆听男人的困境，并且指控男子气概的存在本身就是个罪恶时，那么男人会往哪里去呢？
So one of the most infamous men in the world, Andrew Tate's misogynistic tirades have been viewed billions of times online.
Every single man since the dawn of human time had more than one woman. If I had a woman, I would decide not to cheat because I decide. However, I would not see my infidelity as nearly anywhere near even 1% as disgusting as female infidelity, because female infidelity involves emotion. You will not sleep with a man you don't like. I can sleep with a woman I don't like. It's a completely different thing. I can be head over heels in love with a woman, ready to die for her, ready to take a bullet for her, protect her, give her all the money in the world, make sure she has a beautiful family, a nice big house, all of it. And I'll still f that bitch. Watch me.
That's not what I said. I was talking about an OnlyFans company when that question was asked. But I said that if a woman is going out with a man, she belongs to that man. That's his woman. So she wants to do OnlyFans. She owes him some money because she's his. Yes.
Andrew Tate 是个充满争议性的人物，许多人指控他是个丑女、杀猪、有毒的男子气概的化身，甚至指控他有涉及性贩卖的罪名。而这项指控仍然在罗马尼亚的法院的官司审判中，结果还未明朗化。许多人不能理解为什么 Andrew Tate 在说出这么有争议性的言论之后，还有这么多人始终拥护他。因为当个男子气概被当成是有毒的世界里， Andrew Tate 所谈论的男子气概的版本，至少可以让许多跌落谷底的男人得到了鼓励，得到了激励，重新站了起来。
What do you say to young men who come to you for advice, who feel lost, who don't really know where they fit into society?
I say that life as a man is exceptionally difficult. I say the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing about being a man is you're born without value. Society doesn't care about you. You're only going to be cared about based on how useful you are. You have the chance to build yourself up and become a superhero if you're prepared to do the hard work and be indefatigable enough to never quit. But if you're going to stand around and wait for a handout, nobody's going to ever respect you. And I think that a lot of people have forgotten about how difficult and how competitive it is as a man. We're always in constant competition with each other. And it's your duty as a man to stand up and say, I want to be as important and strong and good-hearted and God-fearing as possible. And I need to work hard to achieve those things.
当左派不愿意谈论男子气概时，这股真空刚好让更多的右派深入谈论这些事情，因为右派相较于左派更加愿意和这些男人对话。
I'm on the record saying there's no such thing as toxic masculinity. There is only masculinity, and there's the aspects of it that are useful to a female imperative, and then the aspects of it that are inconvenient. So the guys doing the stupid stunts on Jackass, that masculinity is the same masculinity that prompts the fireman to run into the burning building and save the baby. And so whatever is convenient to a female imperative, that's non-toxic masculinity.
其实右派也有很多人不认同 Andrew Tate 这号人物，右派本身也有纷争，像是比较偏向传统主义与保守派的右派，他们也并不完全认同 Andrew Tate 的做法。
What I've said about Andrew Tate is that I would say that 75% of Andrew Tate's diagnoses of the problem are pretty correct.
Yeah, I agree.
And then I would say that a lot of his prescriptions are completely wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So he will say men have lost their role in the world, and then what he will model is cam girls. And say, well, that's not actually the solution. But what you're saying about the problem of men losing their role and men needing to be masculine and men needing to want to win and men needing to cultivate an ability to go out and succeed and thrive in the world, all of that is 100% true. I just think that he himself on a personal level wasn't providing a model of that. To me, a model of that is a guy who is married, who has kids, who lives in the community, who betters the community he lives in, who hires people, who creates a business. Like, these are the things that historically speaking did define manhood.
然而，虽然左派一直把男人的困境议题放在一旁，认为这种事情男人应该要自己搞定，但是当他们发现许多的年轻人已经完全把 Andrew Tate 当作偶像看待，就像过去年代的年轻人把史特龙和阿诺·施瓦辛格当作是男性典范的情形一样，这时候左派才惊觉到事情已经不对劲了，问题已经严重到无法再忽视下去了。
Many progressives have ignored the opportunity to sell men on a better vision of what they could be. And it is the point that if you do not like the current role models that are being put up for men, you need to offer them something else. It's not just a case that you can leave the vacuum and then start throwing your toys out of the pram because, oh, Andrew Tate's Bugatti, like, I can't believe he smokes cigars and drinks bottled water. Like, you can't complain about that unless you're going to say, and here is something that I propose instead of that. Because men are going to find someone, they need someone. Simply abandoning them is precisely the reason why the right has dominated this conversation.
所以左派到底能不能为男人发声？是不是为男人发声就会直接被标签为丑女那挂的人物 ？Scott Galloway 任职于纽约大学的临床教授，身为进步左派的他，开始公开讨论到男性困境与男子气概的相关议题。
The dynamic is you have 50 men on Tinder, 50 women on Tinder. 46 of the women will express all of their interest to just 4 men, which leaves 46 men vying for the attention of just 4 women. So if you apply the Gini coefficient to online dating, it's got the same Gini coefficient as income inequality in Venezuela. So in the US, what's happened with online dating is it's amazing for the top 10% of attractiveness of men. It's okay for the top half.It is a disaster for the bottom half.
另外一位左派英美学者作家 Richard Reeves， 他也开始抨击美国心理学会对于男子气概是有毒的论述。
What do you think about the term toxic masculinity?
I think it's a toxic term. It's not just vacuous, it's actively harmful. And interesting, a lot of feminists will say that now too. There's a lot of people like Helen Lewis who writes The Atlantic and so on. They're just saying, look, this term is not helping us. It's actually pushing men away.from a conversation about masculinity, and can we please stop using it? And so this is not a right-wing view at all.
Richard Reeves 在他的最新著作《Of Boys and Men》也更进一步的批评美国心理学会在2018年出了一份有关男人与男孩的报告。
That became an infamous report. The report was weak and the summary was worse. So I said, okay, so they have this report on boys and men that treats boys and men as blank slates. There's no biology, as you say, no mention of testosterone, no mention of puberty, etc.I wonder what the one on women and girls does. So they had a previous report on women and girls that talks about puberty. It talks about fertility. It talks about menopause. It talks about the impact of hormones on your psychology, so that women or therapists who are working with girls and women have that information as they're working with them. But none of that was in the one on men. So they ended up with this position where they treated women and girls like flesh and blood, right, as having biologies, having bodies that affect their psychology, but not men. And that's an extraordinary position to end up in, given that the advice was supposed to be to help psychologists deal with men.
而不只是在学术界而已，左派谈论当代男人困境也渐渐的在政界发酵。总而言之，这1-2年开始兴起左派谈起男性议题的风潮，也逐渐端上了主流媒体的台面。
If there are real problems in a society and responsible people don't acknowledge and address them, irresponsible people will exploit them.And that is already happening on this issue, both online and at the ballot box. We cannot leave a vacuum by neglecting this issue.
部分左派也开始理解，如果只是因为害怕被标签为丑女就忽略掉男人的困境，问题并不会就此消失。如果你只是抱怨右派方法很烂，但是自己却给不出解法，那么年轻的男性自然会自己去找出答案。
I have no idea what your politics are, Steve. I consider myself a progressive.I think progressives have to take back masculinity. and that is we have to define what masculinity means and show a vision. Why are all the dudes these conservatives? So, I mean, I'll give you an example. I'm a profane and vulgar person. And on the left, they immediately conflate. I've cursed several times on this show. I talk about sex very openly and very crudely. That doesn't mean I'm not a feminist. Doesn't mean I don't have progressive values. So I think the left needs to take back profanity and vulgarity, and I think we need to take back masculinity.
我认为男子气概不代表你被的父权压迫做着你不想做的事情。如果你的个性是偏中性化、偏女性化，而这可以为你带来更好的生活，那么你去做你想做的事情，这没有什么问题。但是不要认为男子气概就在压迫你、逼你变成奴隶的概念。当你有自己真正想要过的生活，你找到你的北极星，你有这份原始驱动，然后你再看看拥有力量、拥有荣誉感、拥有能力、拥有勇气、拥有这些所谓的男子气概的特质，到底他们是在帮助你呢，还是在压迫你的人生？你可以不需要受到台湾僵固文化的枷锁，你可以开启你的英雄旅程，探索这个世界。而在这个旅程中，伴随着男子气概的属性在你身旁，我认为这对你的未来会非常的有帮助。好，如果你喜欢这个影片的话，我相信你也会喜欢这一个影片，因为在这个影片里面我聊了母胎单身的隐藏真相。那么我们就下个影片见啦，拜拜。